all worked together before the Bush administration.
I used to write speeches for Don Rumsfeld in the Pentagon, and we came up with this phrase that weakness is provocative, strength deters.
Our report on rebuilding America's defenses said even before September 11th, the defense budget was too low. It looked ahead to the kinds of wars that we've now ended up fighting in Afghanistan and in Iraq.
What think tanks do is come up with new rationalizations and new threats. That's what they're paid to do.
Iraq under Saddam Hussein was a terrorist state. I think Iran is a terrorist state.
North Korea is a very special problem. They can build nuclear weapons, and they're perfectly capable of exporting them, and we cannot allow that.
These are states that not only host, but in a way fund international terrorism, encourage international terrorism. They have to be eliminated.
This was almost completely adopted by the administration, in part because the people who wrote this had all been brought into the administration.
We must prevent the terrorists and regimes who seek chemical, biological, or nuclear weapons from threatening the United States.
It is not at all accidental that when the President names our enemies in the 2002 State of the Union message in the Axis of Evil, that it includes Iraq, Iran, and North Korea.
So in a real way, we have this new phenomenon where think tanks are now an integral part of what we used to think of as the military-industrial complex.
Eisenhower may well have been predicting these people when he talked about if we didn't keep an eye on the military-industrial complex, we would see a disastrous rise of misplaced power. People making policy who have zero accountability to the voter. So throughout the summer, something was operating in the Pentagon that was unique. In August of 2002, was announced to us that all of those folks that had come in and made up this expanded Iraq desk would be called the Office of Special Plans.
The Office of Special Plans was created in the Rumsfeld Department of Defense in order to produce the intelligence that the President and the Vice President wanted, making an enemy out of Iraq.
The Office of Special Plans had one primary job, and that was to produce a set of talking points on the topic of Iraq, WMD, and terrorism. And we were to use them in any document that we prepared, exactly as they were written in their entirety. We were, all of us, myself included, very familiar with what the intelligence was saying about Iraq. But the problem was, when you look at what was in these talking points, you could tell it was designed to convince the reader that Iraq, and Saddam Hussein specifically, constituted a major, serious, terrible, evil threat to not just his neighbors, but to the United States.
His regime has the design for a nuclear weapon, was working on several different methods of enriching uranium, and recently was discovered seeking significant quantities of uranium from Africa.
And that would be the statement. He's actively seeking it, and this means that he's a danger. But the intelligence actually said that Saddam Hussein in the 80s, in the late 80s, actively sought fissionable materials in Africa, but he hasn't done anything like that in the past 12 years. The statement would act like he did it yesterday, taking bits of intelligence out of context, without the qualifiers, without the rest of the story, and placing it as a bullet and presenting it as if it's a factoid.
There is no doubt that Saddam Hussein now has weapons of mass destruction.
And this was given to us, action officers, to use in papers that we would prepare for our higher-ups, to include guys like Wolfowitz and Rumsfeld.
The United States knows that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. The UK knows that they have weapons of mass destruction. Any country on the face of the earth with an active intelligence program knows that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction.
These guys were manipulating public opinion, okay, creating falsehoods and fantasies to inspire fear in the American people so that they could have their war.
The President of the United States.
If war is forced upon us, we will fight with the full force and might of the United States military, and we will prevail.
Evidence from intelligence sources, secret communications, and statements by people now in custody reveal that Saddam Hussein aids and protects terrorists, including members of Al-Qaeda.
I remembered when I was in Vietnam, we used to get requests, can you put my father and my son's name on the side of the helicopter? Can you put it on a rocket? I said, you know what? That's a good idea. I'm going to do that. I'm going to try to do that. So I sent out emails to the Secretary of all the Armed Forces. I'm a retired New York City Police Department sergeant and a proud Vietnam veteran. I lost my son on 9/11. I can't tell you in words what his loss means to me. I would respectfully request if you could put his name on some piece of armament in the Iraq War. You know, we haven't caught bin Laden, but, you know, let's do something here. Who was responsible? Come on, let's hit him. Iraq was responsible. Good, let's go. You say Iraq? Let's go. Let's get in there. Let's kick the hell out of them.
It turns out it's not that hard to get a country to go to war. That even in a country like the United States, where there is freedom of information and multiple media channels, that the administration can just dominate the debate, dominate the argument.
We have this idea that we have lots of information available. There's so much that's not available, and so much of the truth, quote unquote, is obscured by political actors who don't want the world to see what they're doing.
Needless to say, the president is correct.
What's going on, I'm sorry to say, is a belief that the public doesn't need to know.
The policy is?
I'm working my way over to figuring out how I won't answer that.
Limiting access, limiting information to cover the backsides of those who are in charge of the war is extremely dangerous and cannot and should be accepted. Now, I'm sorry to say that up to and including the moment of this interview, that overwhelmingly it has been accepted.
The Pentagon, for many years now, since Vietnam, has worked extremely hard at shaping news and how the media reports that news. We train people to say certain things in a certain way.
Our defeat and humiliation in South Vietnam.
What they learned from Vietnam, above all, was that they lost the war because they couldn't keep it private from the American public.
After the Vietnam War, the Pentagon began studying how can we make sure there are no more body bags in American living rooms. And we must find a way to no longer allow reporters in the field to actually see death.
You get to the Iraq War when they discovered this new, typical bit of Pentagon jargon called embedding.
Gunfire coming from the tops of the building.
We've gotten to know these Marines very well. We do live with them, we eat with them, we travel with them. But I think, remained objective.
The embedded coverage had flags and banners, but no one was actually finding out the truth about the reasons, the rationales for going in.
I have great respect for the media. I mean, our society is a good, solid democracy because of a good, solid media. But I also understand that a lot of times there's opinions mixed in with news.
We won't disagree with that.
And let's just really be honest. Reporters and news organizations need access to power. They need the president. They need the defense secretary. They need these people to speak, to be on camera, to do interviews.
What you have is a miniature version of what you have in totalitarian states. They produce films about how great the great leader is and how he's getting greater in every way, every day.
There will be a day of reckoning for the Iraqi regime, and that day is drawing.